the beauty of live broadcast, isn't it? When you don't actually realise you're live and you're still having a little chit chat amongst yourself. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the first episode of the Higher Business Series, Creating a Thriving Culture. My name is Lula Diemo. I'm the Executive Director of the Tech Diversity Foundation and also the founder of a B2B marketing agency called Best Case Scenario. I am super excited about this morning's discussion. Having worked in the technology sector since the late 90s, I was in an environment that was, obvious in its lack of diversity. Only back then, we didn't have the language for it. It was just one of those things that you took and you understood to be, that's how it is. So today, I'm going to be joined by David, a trailblazer in ethical business practices with a storied career. From leading businesses to impactful roles in global sustainability initiatives, and Arlene, a seasoned consultant renowned for her work in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion across global organizations. Now, today, David and Arlene are going to share their insights and experiences, illustrating how businesses can flourish by prioritizing the well-being of their people and the planet. Now, before we kick off, a quick word from our sponsor. The Higher Business Series is brought to you by Wiser, the decision-making platform that enhances how teams and companies make decisions. Wiser uses data and AI to ensure the right mix of diversity and expertise involved in every decision. Its recommendation engine helps you unearth talent in your organization, ensuring that the best people are in the room for every decision. Now, you can learn more about Wiser and you can do a free trial. I think it's wiser.business. So go to wiser.business because it is absolutely awesome. Now, let's get to the conversation. Arlene, David, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Absolute pleasure, Lily. Thank you.
Well, everyone knows that you talk more than that because they've heard us having an off-screen conversation when we were actually on screen. So I'm going to do that again. Good morning, David. I know you're in Australia, so it's morning for you.
Yes. Good morning, Lily. Good morning, everyone.
And Arlene, good afternoon.
Oh, actually, it's pretty much evening here. I'm dialing in from outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S.
Oh, pleasure. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Arlene. We really appreciate it. So to start things off, I'm going to start by asking you, and I'll start with you, Arlene. What does thriving culture mean to you?
Oh, a thriving culture. I think a thriving culture is a culture where people truly believe that they are valued and appreciated and that their contribution counts towards making critical decisions that drive the organization towards reaching its goals. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, but I oftentimes capitalize believe. Not that they're told or that we train them up or that we have all these grand strategies, but they really have to believe that they're valued and appreciated. Because when people believe they're valued and appreciated, and I've done a lot of research in this space, in the DEI space, that's how I actually started my career as a researcher back in the late 90s. After I abandoned my career in technology, I was asked this critical question: why do people like you leave organizations? Black female, very well educated. I went to MIT. I had an executive MBA. And a friend of mine who left her career as a PhD scientist, and they wanted to know why we left. And that research project led to this very statement that I've kept with me and built my practice on. As we interviewed thousands of people and collected data, what we found is that those who believed that they were valued and appreciated by leaders and by their coworkers, they truly did try their best, and those cultures flourished. They were able to accomplish wonderful things. So that's what I will share as my opener of a thriving culture.
That's fantastic. And you can't fake that, can you? You can't force it, as you mentioned, and you can't fake it. So thank you for that, Arlene. So David, over to you.
Good. Well, firstly, let me say I completely agree with everything Arlene said, and I think she summarized it beautifully. When I think about a thriving culture, the first thing I think of is happiness in the workplace. people really enjoying coming to work, enjoy being there. It's kind of the opposite of people walking through the front door, expending all their energy by the time they leave, having nothing left over for their family or their personal life, and coming back and doing it all over again the next day. It's an environment which actually energizes people, and people want to be there. And that's where you get all the kind of, I guess, the flow-on benefits that come out of that, of attraction and retention of people, and so on and so on. But often it can be linked to an ROI and a bottom line result, if you like, of having a thriving culture. And we'll probably unpack that a little bit as we go. And I've got a few examples of that myself. But I in many ways, I feel a bit uncomfortable talking about the ROI of looking after your people, because really looking after your people should be an end in itself. Because I think when you are a board or you're a senior executive team CEO, your primary focus really should be on the well-being of your people and their happiness, and everything else will just flow from there, really.
But yeah, I mean, and we'll touch on a few points you made there. Thanks, David. But I think, it's that need, business needs to be able to measure something, right? And if they can't put a metric to it, it's very challenging for it to be a priority of an organization. So that's something I'd love to unpack a bit more in a moment. So now, Arlene, when we talk about this need for people within an organization to believe, believe they matter, believe that their voice matters, believe that their contribution matters. Can you give some sort of, examples of maybe DEI initiatives that you've worked on with organizations that have been successful, and why they've been successful and how? You're on mute, Arlene. You get 3. That's your first strike. I'm allowing 3. I'm allowing 3 strikes this morning. That's number 1.
That's 1. Hey, I like being in the down count, so that's okay. I think one of the best examples I can give is about 9 years ago, I was approached by a global organization. It was an NGO style organization. It was a donor-led organization, $1 billion organization. They work on issues around social justice and rule of law and so many other critical issues. And yet, all the good that they were doing externally did not translate to much good internally. And I was asked to come in alongside of their very first chief diversity officer and help them shape the culture differently. And each organization is different. And I love this as an example because they're organized very differently than corporate organizations. They were organized around different areas of need in different pockets around the world. And so we had to approach the work differently, not like a corporate structure. And what we ended up doing was we created localized teams. People have to feel this where they live, and we let the local teams, and we did give people some training and some opportunity to understand, just so they have a common language. Training should be really focused on creating a common language. So if I say I don't feel included, or if I say something about someone's behavior, someone else in the organization knows explicitly what I mean. That's where training can be very helpful, is creating and forming a common language around the common experience that people have. And one of the
regardless of where you are in the world,
regardless of where you are in the world, absolutely. We say things differently. Oftentimes I give the example of, 2 children, which one's more respectful? The one who says, no, I don't want to clean up the room, but then cleans up the room, or the one who says, yes, I'll do it, but then never cleans up the room? And whether I'm in India or China or the US or Germany, I get very different answers about which child's the better child. And the same thing goes for at work. And so when we give people that common language, then they're able to share their experiences and stop feeling so alone. And then we give them the tools to build experiences to bring leaders and others up and down the organization into the same space. One group based in London, where there were a lot of lawyers, okay, a lot of lawyers in this office, they decided that the best way that they could get people on the same page was to create a program called Debate Mate, right? We're going to teach people to talk like lawyers.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
And in Debate Mate, they were given like 5 or 6 hours of instruction of how to debate appropriately and the rules of debate and whatnot. And then they held a big debate, divided into teams, and they were debating the issue of inclusion. And each team had to, had the appropriate amount of time, but it was so instructive for people in the organization to hear the challenges that people were experiencing in the moment in a language that many lawyers, actually, I think something like 60% of the office were lawyers, regardless of their role, they were lawyers. And so people could hear it for the first time. And that really helped facilitate change. So that's just one example.
I mean, that's interesting, because you think almost, I mean, if you're not comfortable, if you're not a lawyer, and you're not comfortable in that debate type sort of environment, do you actually get heard? So going back, that caters to a particular personality type to thrive in that environment, I would have thought.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so how we do this work has to change, based on the organization. I just finished a project with a global financial services organization, very, very high-end financial services organization. And so we use different language when approaching people in the organization, and so that they could, talk with their mentors and sponsors in a way that their mentors and sponsors could hear them and give them the guidance that they were seeking. So it has to be culturally appropriate.
I'm going to pick up. I really want to pick up that notion of a debate mate type sort of concept, because David, I'm going to come to you, because it kind of feeds into that difference between equality and equity, where organisations will put on run a sort of initiative for everybody, thinking that's their way of being inclusive, but forgetting that we're not all the same. So if we're looking for something which is equitable, that's different. So David, just your wealth of knowledge and experience, what have you seen, or an example of what good looks like around the DEI type sort of programs?
Yes. Okay. Well, look, I might use my first day as a managing director as an example, because I learned a hell of a lot or continue to learn.
The baptism of fire.
Career, but there was certainly a lot of learning in the early days, because I'd never been a managing director before. And that was of Konica Minolta in Australia. It's a tech company. Competing against probably better known global brands like Xerox and HP and Canon and so on. So we were in that space. But I think when I think about these topics, and I listen to Arlene and her example there, I ask myself, well, you can kind of set strategies in place, and you can come up with a program that gets everybody engaged or whatever. But who decides that? Who decides what's going to work? Who decides what's going to be most effective? Who decides what is actually going to touch the hearts and minds of all of those people? And I think, look, I'm going back to 2013 when I was made the first non-Japanese managing director of Konica Minolta in Australia, after the company had traded here for 40 years. So there was a big cultural shift in itself there. And unfortunately, I didn't have the value of the Wiser platform, which is a great platform for helping companies make decisions in an inclusive way. But so I kind of went about it in a more analog fashion, I guess. But the announcement that I would be the managing director was made at a conference. About half the company probably was at that conference. And I stepped up on stage and I made the statement that I wanted us all to work together to build a company that cares about the people who work here, that cares about our customers, and that cares about our community. The next day I walked into work, that was at a hotel, so I walked into work to the office for the first time as the person running that company. And I sent an email to everybody and I said, look, you weren't all able to be at the conference. This is the, if you like, the vision statement that I made. There's only one problem. I don't actually know how to do it, and I really need your help. So I showed a degree of vulnerability, and I certainly showed openness to everybody's ideas. And we sent out a survey tool, and this is a voluntary survey, and we got a response rate in the high 90% to a voluntary survey. And as well as all the Likert scale stuff about, do you like working here? Good, very good, whatever. There were free text fields, and we got 800 ideas from 400 people on how to improve the company. And the interesting thing was, as a Japanese company, it was, of course, run through a very hierarchical management structure, top down. Nobody ever questioned the person above them. That's the way things work. It's almost like done with military precision. And these people, some had worked there for 40 years, and they'd never been asked their opinion on how do they think we could build a better company. But so basically I stumbled across, in a way, the technique of the wisdom of crowds, of going to everybody and saying, I can come up with a vision statement, but I kind of need you guys to fill in the gaps here. And we just got, fantastic ideas. And off the back of that, we formed smaller groups to tackle different, the implementation of some of those different ideas. We formed one kind of permanent group of 20, which was drawn from every different branch, different genders, different age groups, different backgrounds, different occupations. So we deliberately went away from, the senior executive team know everything, and we'll tell you what we're going to do, which, to me just kind of seemed like a ridiculous notion as to how, many businesses operate. So instead of it being top down, it was percolating up. And it was, honestly, within, I would say, weeks, there was a massive cultural transformation had begun inside that company, from a bunch of really good people, but disengaged people, with a brand that was not particularly well known, wasn't performing particularly well commercially, to a real powerhouse. And we just did some, as a group, we all together did some amazing things, purely because of that element of inclusivity and togetherness and respect for everybody in the company.
So you did the, just by, and thank you for sharing that, David, that's brilliant, but just by being vulnerable yourself, saying that you want to create an organization that cares, whether you're a customer or you work for the company, you were able to give or create that notion within everybody that worked there, that they believed for the first time, it seems, that they mattered. So that goes back to your original point, Arlene, that notion of belief and the impact that can have, which I think is incredible. So I just want to, so do you want to add to that, Arlene?
Yes, I do. So there are a couple of elements that I work with leaders individually that I share with them that I think David just blew the doors off with his example. And the first is just to establish the mindset that this is a journey, and you're on the first step of this journey, and you're going to need guidance along the way. And so that guidance comes from letting other people speak first. So asking the questions and letting other people speak first. And in letting other people speak first, no, I didn't create this statement, but I use it all the time. Giving people equal voice, regardless of where they are in the organization, drives more equitable solutions. When we give people equal voice, David, you said people had worked there for 40 years and they had never been given equal voice, in saying what was great about the place, or what they liked, or how could the place change for the better. So those are just some of the elements that oftentimes, David, if I could bottle you and take you with me to sit down with other leaders, say, listen, it really does work. It really does work, because there's oftentimes a modicum of disbelief that will get them where they want to go.
So I want to pick up on that, Arlene, right? So, we've been talking about this for a while. This is not a new conversation. It's not a new concept. Yet we're still struggling with businesses really understanding why it's important, why they should do it, and the impact it can have. So why is that? Why? I mean, Arlene, you've been working in the space for a very long time. Do you see a shift and a change in an understanding, or are you feeling that you're still, a lot of companies are still in the same mindset of why bother?
I think it's a both and. I think yes and yes. There are still a number, and why. So let me go to the data. What data show? So if you were to draw out a normal distribution curve and say, and we're plotting diverse teams and their performance under this normal distribution curve. Diverse teams outperform. They're at one tail end, the high end, and they're at the very low end, diverse teams. Because when diverse teams don't have that leader, right, driving inclusive behaviors and providing stewardship, then diversity tends to pull people apart. And it's like what you said, people are drained. They go home, they do their best to, work themselves up for the next day. But think about in the middle of that distribution curve, you have non-diverse teams as well as diverse teams, and their performance look very similar. And you can continue to maximize non-diverse team performance, right? By driving behaviors with money or driving behaviors with other incentives. You can continue to maximize, or just having a revolving door. Some companies are really good at, oh, that's fine, they'll leave, we'll get another, right? And having that revolving door, and they're maximizing what they drain out of new people, right? And so that's part of it, is that, the math shows, and there are a couple of researchers, one at the University of Michigan, one at INSEAD, and one there at London School of Economics, who will tell you, yeah, you can have non-inclusive behavior, right, drive better performance on diverse teams, but it only goes so far. What we're talking about is getting people up into that tail, that magic sweet spot, where they are 2 standard deviations away from the norm. That's what we're trying to get to. But as long as they're, getting what they want out of it, some leaders will not see the value of changing such that they can get different and better performance.
So, David, talk us a bit more from that journey in regards to that initial vulnerability to the response that you had. How did you then incorporate that and sustain that sense of belief within across the workforce?
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point. How do you sustain it? So we kind of lit a fuse, but I'm not sure how to extend that analogy, but the light that was kind of created, it didn't just go out, a month later or a year later or whatever. It continued, it kind of burnt bright, if you like. I think one thing there is people need to perceive that it's genuine. That, they weren't being manipulated by a strategy that we thought up in the boardroom. It wasn't like that at all. And people knew it wasn't like that. But it is important that the senior people in the organization, they do have a degree of status, and they run departments in their own right and so on. And the important thing is to continually reinforce the message. And so, I employed some really old-fashioned management principles. I don't know, they're probably from the 80s, management by walking about. I was just really accessible. So some of the best feedback I got was when I was making a coffee in our internal cafe, or when I'm in the lift, or when I'm walking down the corridor, or, just walking around the open plan area and asking people how their weekend went or whatever, but continually reinforcing that message that we're open to learning from you, we're listening. And then modeling the behaviors that you start to talk about and that people say they want to see. So, for instance, well before COVID, I started to work from home, typically 1 day a week. Sometimes it might have blown out to 1 day in a 2-week period, but I'd work from home. And I'd post on our intranet a photo of myself in my lounge room working from home. And I'd say, hey, I'm working from home today. You should try it. You can be really productive. It brings a different balance into your work and personal life. So again, that's modeling the behavior. And it just gave people the confidence to think differently, to break the shackles of what we'd always done. And I'm a great believer in bringing kind of new thinking, if you like, and giving it a try. And we had a very big university in our commercial precinct of Macquarie Park, which is Macquarie University. And we used to host students several times a year. We'd have an intake, and it was an accessible subject where they would go to an existing business and they would have a role to play, be embedded in a department, and they'd kind of learn at the coalface. And I'd always meet that group when they first came in. We'd take them into the boardroom and the managing director have a chat to them. And I used to say to them, I would rather have one of you in our business than 10 McKinsey consultants. And then I'd explain to them why. Because the McKinsey consultants are largely kind of going to think like me. They probably, look a bit like me, and they, might be in my age group, or I might be a bit older, but and they probably did an MBA like me and read the same material that I read, et cetera, et cetera. But you bring in a 20-year-old kid who doesn't know a lot about business. I used to say to them, it's going to be really hard for you, but I want you, please, 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 when you're sitting in meetings and you hear something that doesn't make sense, just politely pop your hand up and just say, may I ask a question, please? And then just question why the stream of conversation is going down that path. And if you're brave enough, maybe even suggest an alternative. But even just asking us to stop for a moment and think and assess the direction that we're taking is going to be of immense value for our organization. So it makes it so much more stimulating and more fun when you give everybody license to think differently and to bring their own ideas to the workplace. And we've all heard that expression, bring your whole self to work. That's a lovely concept, but it should also mean bring your own ideas to work and share them.
That's brilliant, though. I mean, there's so many things there that I'd love to unpack a bit more. But what you did just with that interaction was create an environment where they felt safe to bring their whole self to work, felt safe to put their hand up and ask the question, and often that's not the case. But the point I wanted to pick up on in regards to leading by example, like you walking around having those conversations with people in the kitchen, and it's Arlene, now we've got more of a hybrid working environment, where a lot of teams are dispersed, a lot of teams we are working virtually. Does that make it more challenging for organizations to create this environment where everyone feels like they belong and that engagement, that incidental, and I've often think about this, the incidental conversations that we would have or used to have in the office or over here or bumping in the corridors doesn't happen as much now. So are we having to work harder?
I don't know if it's harder, but I think we have to work differently. One of the mistakes I think that oftentimes organizations or individuals make, even just when scheduling meetings, right, is not allowing that informal transition time. They keep everyone in the waiting room, the timer counts down, everyone pops in, and the meeting starts. And then the meeting ends, and boom, everybody's gone. And what I often advise people to do is schedule your meetings for a 45-minute time slot, which means there's a 15-minute lag before if you're doing them on the hour or if they're on the half hour, whatever, and leave the camera on, leave the room, just like you have, a conference room after the meeting, because as we all know, there's oftentimes a better meeting after the meeting, right? And so just stay there and informally, invite people to say, hey, how did that go for you? Or maybe put some things in chat, right? I think we also have to be more deliberate about voice and making certain, as David said, that people lend their voice. And so encouraging people use these tools to use chat. For example, when I facilitate a session, I tell people up front, we're going to be using your hands, your eyes, your ears, and your mouth to communicate with each other in this space. I will ask some questions and I will ask people and I will turn everyone's mic off and you will need to put your answer in chat. Don't worry about typing it, perfectly, but put an answer in chat because some people will feel more comfortable putting it in chat. Because as we all know, when we're in a virtual room, it's very hard for us to, get that space. And some people can't find their hands, I wanted to raise my hand and some people are going like this and some people don't have their camera on. And so being very clear about when you're going to be using chat or whiteboards or sticky notes and allowing people the time to use those things properly. That's the other issue that I see is that people will say, oh, I want everybody to answer in chat or I want to use the whiteboard. But some people are still struggling, right, to get the whiteboard up and to use the annotation, tools properly. So give people time and use all the tools that these wonderful virtual rooms allow us to use. I also encourage people to bring in a video, a short video, so that everyone can experience, something that's absolutely the same. Put it in this, find a video that captures one of the concepts or just a fun video, right? Something funny. Commercials are great. By the way, they're great beer commercials in Europe. They're they're about inclusion. I got a list of them, and it just helps people feel more comfortable. Hey, yeah, I've had that happen too. Bought the last 2 tickets at the movie theater and had to climb over, 15 people to get to my seat. And this commercial just shows how uncomfortable people are doing it. And everybody has a laugh at it. And you say, hey, I don't want anybody to feel that way in this meeting. And everybody knows what you mean. So use the tools appropriately, right? And give people time to engage because the timing is very different for engagement in a virtual environment than it is when we're face-to-face.
No, brilliant. So, David, just back to you again, just picking up on some of the points you made earlier. Have you been able, or can you share maybe some of the outcomes, or how you've been able to measure the impact of some of these concepts that you put in place when you were managing director?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lily. So firstly, let me just pick up on this, what is sometimes tension between quantitative and qualitative measures. The business world is largely quantitative, it's all kind of based on numbers and all that kind of stuff. But there's an old expression that not everything of value can be measured, and not everything that can be measured is of value. And I think it's worthwhile remembering that. Now, I have to declare a bias here. I'm not a quant. I'm not the number. But I must admit, when we started to implement some of the changes requested by our team members, there was some skepticism in the executive team. And people said, oh, well, this is really dangerous stuff here, going to people and saying, what do you want to change? Because they're all just going to ask for more money, or they're going to ask for shorter days or, whatever. And one of the great privileges for me of being a managing director was I had the opportunity to observe human behavior every single day. And I was a keen observer of it and interactor with it, if you like. And what I saw was I didn't see selfishness. I didn't see people focused on wanting, more money necessarily. Everybody's got to earn a decent wage and feel that they're remunerated fairly for their work. Of course they do. That's always going to be important there. But what I saw was people with far broader awareness, able to talk about things like, David, one of those 3 pillars about, sort of internal customers, people, customers, and community. Let's talk about community. What more can we do in the community? And they asked us to form charity partnerships, which the company had never had. It was a bit sort of behind the times in that respect. We even did things like we supported a not-for-profit organisation in Cambodia that was involved in rescuing young women who'd been trafficked over there and were the victims of sexual assault, and some pretty tough and hard issues. And all of our team members really, one person might come up with the idea and then a stack of people would kind of buy into that. And what we found when we started to do those things was that the business, that those people who are a little bit skeptical or cynical, they started to change as well. Why? Because the added richness that we had within our organization, as a natural consequence, just flowed into the numbers. We didn't have to focus on the numbers. We could focus on the people and the richness, and the numbers followed. And so, I'll give you an example. We started to win a lot of very big contracts with national organisations that had never dealt with us in our entire history in Australia. They'd go to tender, they'd do an examination of the whole industry, and we started to be awarded these contracts. And I would go in and I would thank the procurement manager or whoever it was, and I would say, look, we think you've made a really good decision because we actually think we're a great company and we'll be a great partner for you. But can I ask you, why did you award us your contract? Because we've been knocking on your door for 40 years without success. And typically they'd say this, look, we always used to look at price, product specifications, service levels, and then we'd make a decision. And often we just stay with our current network printing and scanning provider because it's too hard to change all the network protocols and get the staff used to new equipment and all of that. That's typically what would happen every 4 years. But our governance procedures now require us to look more deeply at who organisations are that we're getting into a commercial relationship with. And one man used this beautiful example. He said, you all turn up here trying to sell us your bright new shiny cars. They weren't cars, of course, they're multifunction devices. But he said, but what we do now is we look under the hood because they all look really shiny. We look under the hood now. And we stopped looking at what you're trying to sell us, and we started to look at who you are.
Who you are.
Who you are. And he said, and what we saw then is that there are differences. Everything kind of seemed the same before. Now we can see differences. And we said, we're aware of this vision statement you have as a company to look after your people, be honest and transparent with your customers, and to make a difference in society, to have a social impact, even outside of Australia. Like, it's really easy to do research on a company these days and to kind of see what makes them tick. And these people would do that. And they would typically say, and once we did that, we realized that you're a really good fit for us. Your values and our values are very, very similar. And we've awarded you this contract, and we think we'll be partners for a very long time because of the values that we share. Now,
I love that
flow directly into our business metrics. Between the post-global financial crisis and the start of COVID, that 10-year period, we grew that business every single year for 10 years in a declining market. The main product are devices that produce hard copy print. Yeah. And bits of paper coming out of a machine globally was falling off a cliff. Of course, everybody's businesses in that part of their business was in decline. It was a sunset industry in a way. I mean, it'll be around for a long while, but figures were dropping off. We defied gravity. Our business grew, and we weren't particularly diverse. We were pretty mono product in many ways compared to a lot of competitors. It grew every year for 10 years. And I could not say it was to do with product, pricing, better service levels. All the competitors were really good companies. It was purely to do with cultural change. And I won't even say it was, when people are happier, they're more productive and they work harder and they work longer hours. It's not even about that stuff, because that's getting back to numbers. It's just about, when people have a sense, when you care for the well-being of people and they have a sense that they are actually being cared for, then magic the magic just happens, and the numbers take care of themselves.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now I'm conscious of time because we've only got 3 minutes to go, so it's really flown by. So I'm going to ask you both one last question. So Arlene, it's I guess more of a statement than a question. It's we've got listeners all over the world tuned in today. So it's and some may be leaders, some people work in an organisation. Is there a point that you'd like to leave them with to consider when they go about their day today, the impact that they can have as an individual?
Sure. So I love how David uses the word care, and people need to feel cared for. And I break it down. I use care as an acronym because sometimes people need a little bit more detail, right? And the C stands for civility. Can we take care of our needs, others people's needs, and the needs of the situation? Can we be civil towards each other? It starts with civility, and then the next letter A is authenticity, and that's about acceptance. Accepting someone's authenticity, accepting, when I go back to that example, debate mate, accepting the fact that people who aren't lawyers are fearful and intimidated even to get a cup of coffee while you're in the break room because they saw you try that particular case, right? So they're fearful. So authenticity and acceptance. The R is respect. Can we find that balance? Can we respectfully look at someone's values and measure them in a way that reflects the situation? And then last is empathy. And empathy is about you-centered empathy, not me. Not, I have feelings and I understand you do too, but it's really focusing on the needs of someone else in a particular situation. So I share that. So care, and then let's break it down into its component parts.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, David, I'm not going to let you go without telling us about the book you have coming out called Kind. Well, I'm listening to you today. It's not surprising that you have a book coming out called Kind Business. So, can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so Lily, can I eat into my own advertorial time? Because I will answer that question in a second, but I would like to take most of my last minute just to tell you one more story, if I may. I told you the story about the quantitative measure of the power of doing, building a thriving culture, which is the people awarding us contracts and the dollar value and the business growing and so on. Can I tell you something in support of qualitative? And in many ways, this happened very early on for me, and it absolutely emboldened me. And I invited everybody in the company who'd worked there for 25 years or more to come out to dinner when I was made managing director, or a few months afterwards. And they came from different states in Australia. We flew them in, and they were all field service engineers. When your printer, photocopier, whatever you want to call it, breaks down and it's jammed and it doesn't work and it's really frustrating and you kick it and all of that. And then you ring that number and somebody comes in and they fix it. Those people. And we just went out to a restaurant in Sydney, cheap and cheerful, nothing too fancy, no private dining room or anything. And we had a lovely meal together. And it was my way of thanking them for their loyalty to the company. At the end of the meal, one man who hadn't spoken all evening said, "May I please say something?" And I said, "Oh, of course." And he stood up in this restaurant in the middle of a public restaurant, and he made what I imagine was the first speech he'd ever made in his life. Mm-hmm. It was a very powerful moment. People in the restaurant turned around to see what was going on. And he said, "I've worked here for more than 25 years, but I'd never told anybody where I worked. I just didn't see the point. It's just a place that I went to do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and that's how I've fed my family. Now I tell every single person I meet that I work for Konica Minolta. And why would I do that? I do that because I feel so proud to work for a company that would care about young women on the other side of the world who've been trafficked into a life of sexual slavery.
Wow.
Now, every
Wow.
single person that manages another individual or a team or a department or a whole company will know the holy grail is getting everybody on the same page, pulling together and fully engaged. Now, that man's engagement meter didn't just go from disengaged to engaged. That meter kept going. And it moved into things like, loyalty and pride and public advocacy. Absolutely phenomenal. Now, we had no idea when we decided to help these people, these young women in Cambodia, that it had any relationship to our business whatsoever. We did it because it seemed like the right thing to do. But for me, that was one of the most powerful examples of a person's heart being touched through what we were trying to create. And it had nothing to do with us seeking to increase the top line or the bottom line or the market share or any of those kind of figures or whatever. Now, when I stepped down from full-time corporate life a few years ago, people started contacting me and saying, would you come and speak to our exec team or our board or speak at our conference or be on a panel or whatever? And I was very appreciative of that. And then I thought 1 year ago, I do have a experience in this field, and I think that I learnt a lot, and I did want to share it. And the natural consequence was a book popped out at the end. And yes, it's called Kind Business, Values Create Value. And it's pretty much about everything we're talking about today.
That's beautiful. Now, just could I just note that there are a lot of comments coming through on the side. My eyesight's terrible, so I was struggling to see them, but there is one that's caught my eye just in regards to demonstrating, social values and impacts. And the question is, how do you do that? If you're a small business, it's, I think, it's for corporates that do have that sort of notion and intent. But as a small business, how are you able to demonstrate it? If we can't do that, beautiful story there, David, but if you haven't got the means to do that, how do you demonstrate, I guess, your social values to big organizations and procurement teams? So, Arlene, I don't know if you've had any experience of that at all.
Well, I'm a small business.
Yeah, there you go.
So a couple ways. One, you can always elevate the voices of other people. The wonderful thing about social media is that we do get to amplify other people's voices. And so we can give people voice, and we can amplify their voice, right? Be that platform for that person or that group that if you had the financial resources or more financial resources to support, that you would support. I oftentimes connect my large clients with causes that I have vetted, that I've become more familiar with. So I'll teach my large clients about causes and organizations. So that's two ways where you become that connector, right? And then you can just become that amplifier as well.
That's brilliant. I think that's a beautiful way to wrap things up today. So I'm going to thank you both. So thank you, Arlene. Thank you for David. I've really enjoyed the discussion today. And thank you to Wiser for providing us the platform to have this conversation. So with that, I'll bid you all a good day, a good evening, a good morning, and hopefully we get to chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.